you. Yeah, this is called Rough Around the Edges, and I think it'll become clear pretty quick what I'm talking about. My employer, again, as I mentioned before, Duo Security, that's them. This is pretty much the extent of my sales pitch right there. They do 2FA and whatnot, so there you have it. My role there, basically, I do a lot of research into finding patterns and things that people don't normally look for patterns in, applications, network traffic, etc. Some of my previous employers, I've worked for some very large companies, and the one there on the top on the right is kind of interesting, and I'll refer to that in some examples because that one is a nonprofit think tank. MITRE is a nonprofit think tank, and they only had one customer, which was the United States government. And I worked there and worked on a number of different projects. The most exciting of them I can't tell you anything about. The most boring of them I could tell you anything you don't want to know about it because it's so boring. But and when I worked there, I even had a security clearance, which was somewhat kind of funny for me because I had some past indiscretions in my life where these are logos of some companies I actually compromised in my youth. Some of them you may have heard of. In almost every case up here, I actually reported it to the company, and I tried to leave it in a better shape than when I first illicitly entered into it. So I have worn both a black hat and a white hat, and kind of pretty much everything in between. So because of that, I mean, I refer to this as kind of living on the edge, out there on the edge of society, where you're kind of commingling with ne'er-do-wells. I mean, people that are not necessarily have the best intent, and moving back and forth between those groups as a part of my job. I never thought of myself as leading a dual life. I just thought of myself as kind of just weaving in and out of different parts of society. And really, you think of society as like kind of a circle, and for the most part, everyone resides in the middle of it. That's where pretty much everyone is. A lot of the people in here probably consider yourself in the normal range of a human being, and that's a desirable thing. The thing is like you get out to the edges and you discover that's where all the crazies are. Now, of course, the crazies look and think the normals are the crazy ones, and et cetera. But in my travels and whatnot, I've ventured back and forth, and I've noticed that at times, because this has got a nice little circle around society here, sometimes it's not quite that black and white. Sometimes really, really twisted bad things happen out there at the edges. Now, sometimes these really twisted things end up becoming the latest and greatest, newest technology, or they end up becoming people being left behind because of technology. But a lot of times the crazies see it first. So for me, it's worth venturing out there to the edges. And really, when you think about it, where are you guys at specifically? You're probably what I would call the edge of normal, because you're in IT, you're in security. You kind of know, okay, I think I know what you meant by the crazy stuff. Just like, yeah, I see that in my job every day. I'm having to deal with that every day. Moving back and forth through this stuff, it's kind of led me down some interesting paths. I end up thinking about things slightly differently. I actually found, I'm the guy that found John McAfee when he was on the run. There was something kind of goofy that happened. He decided he needed more attention to himself and allowed some reporters to follow him. And what those reporters did was take a picture. There was metadata in the picture that they uploaded to their blog site. And so I just on Twitter I outed him and just said, look at the metadata of the picture, because that pretty much gave his exact location, and then the whole thing was up, and then, then you kind of know the rest of it. Then he tried to run for president of the United States, which was, for some reason, we thought that guy was crazy, so. But anyway, I've also, because of some work I did probably, this originally started probably 12, 13 years ago. I love to fly. I think it's a fun thing to do, and I've always had an interest in doing things with technology while on aircraft. And I had found some interesting things, and I actually got interviewed. This is an article that Kim Zetter from Wired, who's spoken before on the Roadshow, that I had talked to her about this, where there were some problems with the new Boeing 787, which I didn't get to actually take a deep look at, but just from reading the descriptions of everything, they had like navigation stuff running on the same cables as the in-flight entertainment system, which I found to be kind of disturbing. And it's cool, like I said, going through and, playing around with all this stuff. You'd think that everything would turn out well, but no, CNN still got my name wrong and called me Mike Loveless instead of Mark Loveless. But, oh God, I sure miss my hair. I used to have really long hair almost down to my butt. Oh God, that was oh well. But nonetheless, you go through your life and you do all these things. And from a security perspective, I want to use briefly. I'll talk about the past, and we'll kind of bring us up to the present, and then we're going to try to, based upon the patterns of how these things are kind of moving and whatnot, try to explore a few of the ideas from the future. The first one I wanted to talk about was from the past was the rise of distributed denial of service, because this had a fairly direct impact on the way things are now. Back in the late 90s, there was a whole series of these, and what was really tragic about it, this is back when Amazon only sold books. I don't know if anyone remembers that time, but at one point they only sold books. And so someone would take Amazon down, and you couldn't buy a book for an hour. It was just a first world tragedy of the... it made all the press. It was, this big deal back then. To this day, I really have no idea why, because it was just a goofy website that sells books. Who cares? But, or at least that's why I thought this is interesting from my perspective, and certainly the trade magazines were all over it, but, I couldn't believe that people like, the New York Times wanted to interview people about this kind of stuff. But what happened is back then they had these CDNs, content distribution networks. Akamai is a good example of one that was around back then. Amazon became one as eventually they decided, hey, we can do things besides just sell books. We'll sell stuff for everybody. But what happened was these CDNs, they started saying, well, hey, I can actually offer some type of distributed denial of service protection, so I'm going to include that in our service offerings. And I don't know if anyone remembers Slashdot. A few people nodding their heads. Yeah. Back then there was a phenomenon known as being slash-dotted, where if you put a post up and it had some technological relevance to the nerds on Slashdot, and someone put it on Slashdot, all of a sudden your blog, whatever website it was on, was just getting flooded with this traffic, and it would sometimes, in some cases, take it down, and they referred to that as being slash-dotted. And so that was another thing. It says, well, we can scale. These CDNs said this kind of a form of a denial of service attack. We can scale up, and so they did. They eventually, this was kind of the forerunner for the cloud. Basically, is what it turned out to be. Weaponization of cyber. Back in the day, if I found a vulnerability, I might write up a proof of concept exploit, and that exploit might only work, like, say, maybe 1 out of 5 times when you ran it, but it was enough to prove to a vendor that there's actually a problem. Okay, so what happened is that some organizations decided, hey, I'll purchase your exploit, your vulnerability and your exploit code that you have, and then I'll work with the vendor to get it fixed, and you'll get full credit, and you'll be paid for it. And they would use that information to put it into their IDS or whatever product they're offering. And then in some cases, they'd even turn around and resell these exploits. And so that was kind of the model that started. I thought it was going to be a horrible, horrible thing. And it, in a way, it kind of was, because exactly what myself and others had predicted happened, which was people started figuring out that if they weaponized their exploit, instead of working out one every 5 times, if they made it work every time, and they made it work where it didn't crash the system in the process and just worked in the background, and the end user, who was the victim of this, didn't even notice it, that was more valuable. And so you had the rise of bug brokers, people that are purchasing these fully functioning, fully weaponized exploits, and then reselling them to, in some cases, the highest bidder. I have a friend that does this now. He's a multimillionaire. And it took him, I think it took him less than a year to make his first million. And he's just taking a cut. We're talking big, big money can be made in this. And so 0 days have become a really big business. Some cases it's more, what it means basically is that it's more financial value to not have the thing patched. So in many cases the vendor isn't even notified. And the last one will take a little bit of explanation, and that is pretty much the death of the perimeter, which has been kind of a thing that's been discussed here already a little bit. But basically, so what killed the perimeter? What happened in the past that caused this? Well, the first thing that happened was we let everyone have laptops. That was mistake number one. Okay, because they're taking these things to wherever they want to take them and use them, and they wanted access to corporate data. So you had to have dial-up, you had to have VPN, etc. You basically had to punch holes in your network to let them back in some form or fashion. Wi-Fi, another terrible, terrible mistake, and they put it in the laptops, which made it even worse. People figured out, hey, I can do this Wi-Fi thing at my house. Why can't I do it at my office? Pressure builds. People are saying, we wouldn't have to run all that cabling. We could save a little money on cabling. We'll just throw these boxes up wherever we got power to, make it happen, and just run cables to them, and it'll save us all this extra money. A lot of the protocols that the internet is built upon kind of depend upon the fact that you're talking about a physically secure network for them to operate safely without someone sniffing everything. So when Wi-Fi came along, it kind of broke a lot of those types of things. If you're a fan of technical things and you read through some of these older RFCs, the standards that the internet is built upon, there's some of those will actually say in them, that there is a security element there's a security risk if you don't have your network physically secure, as in cabled up. Well, many of those protocols still run over Wi-Fi today, so you have that. So we had to start encrypting everything, and pretty much everyone here that operates a network and remembers when they first put wireless in, how horrid that was for them to deal with. It's just crazy. The last one I think that really killed it was smartphones. Jeff mentioned the FBI allowed to bring in BlackBerries and whatnot, and that's a lot of what was happening. Companies would say, okay, well, you can access corporate stuff from your phone since you're demanding it. Well, you have to use this company phone, and a lot of people complain and says, why can't I just use my home phone that I got, the one in my pocket? And a lot of people at this point have just given up and just saying, yep, you know what, here you go. Just, you can access anything from any device. And that's really what it came down to. It was mobility. Mobility of the user population that has essentially killed the perimeter. They want to be able to work from anywhere, wherever they're at. I've mentioned this before on the panel and at some of the roundtables that I participated in. That's just kind of the thing that it is now. So, and kind of with that, I used to have this thing that I'd say, I referenced Frank Zappa talking about modern jazz. He was asked in an interview what he thought about modern jazz, and he said, modern jazz isn't dead, it just smells funny. And 15 years ago, that's what I was saying about the perimeter, but by about 10, 12 years ago, I'd pretty much given up on that and just basically said, no, I think it's dead. We had to punch holes in it for web, email, VPNs, and now users want to access the data from everywhere. And now with the advent of the cloud and everything else, we're pretty much that's pretty much kind of where we're at now. Where we're kind of heading. This is just a little bit of a taste of it. I'd say probably the first thing would be infrastructure changes that everyone's going to face. I think many of the people I've talked with here, they're pretty much all in on the cloud stuff. There's many companies that have already just said, yeah, we pretty much have gone to the cloud. There's some that are halfway in between, and I understand because you have there's applications and stuff that you run in your home environments that are completely, or in your corporate environments that are completely dependent upon being on-prem. But I work for a SaaS company, SaaS, not like we got attitude, we got SaaS. I didn't mean that, but nonetheless, I mean that's the direction that's kind of heading. I mentioned smart cars in the panel. I mean I personally am a terrible driver. I'm as an American. It's really a hard thing for other Americans to hear. You're never supposed to admit that you're bad at anything, but I am, in fact, a terrible driver. I am very much looking forward to the day when I don't have to drive my own car, and I can have the car drive me wherever I want to go. It'll be great. I'll get in the back seat. I'll fall asleep, wake me up when we get there. I'm really looking forward to that day when that happens. But there's lots of advances that are occurring in this area. I think there's going to be a lot of bleed over from the technology that comes off of automating all these systems, particularly when we were talking about electric cars and battery power. All these things are going to trickle down and spring up in really new and interesting ways in the future, I feel. And of course, then we talked about smart homes. The whole idea of having this house that's all automated, and you can do all this cool stuff with it. It fascinates me as both a researcher, as something I get to pick apart and see how bad it is, and it also excites me as someone who likes to I try to be somewhat forward-thinking. I love new technological advances. I find them just absolutely fascinating. Now, here's a couple of examples of things that kind of tie into this on the left. This one I just put in today. It was something that occurred. A driverless Uber was driving in Tempe, Arizona. They were T-boned by another vehicle. Just hit them and rolled them over partially. So the funny thing is that the Uber vehicle was not responsible. They deemed that the person that hit it was the responsible party in the accident. They apparently weren't paying attention. But Uber ended up, I think they've pulled their entire automated fleet as a result, just as a precaution, which is sad, but at least no one was seriously injured. I don't even know if anyone was actually injured at all. And of course, there on the right was a picture I took. I think I was in Melbourne, and I saw this at a bus stop. And it was an advertisement for, you can get a whole home office or a whole smart home from Telstra. So that's kind of nice. And they throw in broadband with that. So the example they have there is, you can turn off the iron from the office, which I think, is a terrible example. It's just, oh, I am so lazy. I don't want to go all the way across the room. I'm halfway out the door. I'll just turn off that iron when I get to work. It's not a big deal. All right, whatever. But the real, kind of getting more into, what things are going to look like in the future. Because we've been talking about all this IoT stuff, I want to give you kind of an example of where I think things might actually be kind of heading in a way that you're not going to anticipate. So my template for the future is power tools. Milwaukee Tool they are a very well respected, they are a high-end tool company in the United States. This tool I was given by work to take a look at. It comes with an app. This particular model, you can buy this thing. It's expensive. It's a beautiful tool. It's a beautiful drill. But for a little bit more money, you can spend and get the smart version. And I saw a few people smiling and chuckling over the idea of a smart power drill. Why in the hell would I need a smart power drill, you ask yourself? Well, most tools have a couple of settings, high and low, and that's pretty much it. And if they have any torque settings whatsoever, it's usually, just one or two settings at most. This particular one with the included app that you download onto your phone, you can set the RPM to whatever level you want. That way, if you're doing a job and you have a particular drill bit, maybe it's diamond tipped, or maybe you're working with a particular type of material, such as concrete versus wood, you want the RPMs to be at a certain speed to help you complete the job safely, then you can dial that in on your phone. And for torque, you got 10 different settings. And if you look at the picture on the left, next to the glowing Bluetooth light that's on there, you see they've got 1 through 4 written on there. You can store up to 4 profiles, so you can have this thing set up for 4 different things that at a press of a button, you can change the setting on the tool. It's really kind of cool. I wish I could have brought it, but it comes with a lithium battery, and pretty much the last thing they want you to do is, particularly in the United States where we freak out over everything, is that they don't want you getting on board an airplane with a power tool for some reason. They feel like you're going to disassemble the plane mid-flight or something. I have no idea. But otherwise, I would have brought one. But it's got some other features as well. You can have multiple tools. You may have, because they make other models that have these smart features, so you can have like kind of a whole toolbox and complete your inventory and manage it on your phone. The thing that's kind of interesting with that is that you can do fun things like, let's say that you're a contractor and you bought 4 of these drills. This is where it actually begins to become useful, somewhat interesting. You bought 4 of these drills, you're working a job, and everyone's drilling in wood screws into wood. And you've got a couple of guys that are overdoing it. And it's causing the wood to splinter, and you're having to go back and redo work. It's costing you money. Got to get new pieces of wood to go in place. What do? You go up, you update the template, and you push it down to the 4 drills, and you've adjusted the torque, so now we're not over-tightening the wood screws. That's kind of cool. Now, the other thing you can do is, if you're a contractor kind of guy, is you can take a picture of the tool and then attach it to the tool, and it's the picture of where it goes in the cabinet, for storage. You can take a picture of the receipt and attach that to the tool, and that's all gets stored in the cloud and everything. So, and you attach that to the tool so you know when you bought it, and so in case there's like a money-back guarantee, or maybe you just want to know that you bought it at this time because at some point you're going to want to do some type of maintenance on it. You can actually have different states of the tool. So you could say it's available, so now it's available for someone to come and get. It's checked out, so you can write in the name of the person who checked it out. Bob has the power tool. I've assigned this to Bob, and he's using it. You put in there it's down for maintenance or it's broken or something like that, so it's unusable, and you can also set it as lost or stolen. Now here's where it gets really, really interesting. In the base, since it's tracking this stuff via Bluetooth with your phone, part of the app uses the GPS settings of the phone, and so every few minutes what it does is it says, I saw the phone right, or I saw the tool right here where I'm standing at. The app will then phone home to the cloud with the GPS coordinates of where it last saw the tool at. And this works independent of whether you own the tool or not. It happens in the background. If you have the app loaded on your phone and it's someone else's tool that's near you, it'll upload and say, I saw, Fred's tool or whatnot. So what happens is if the tool has been stolen, all of a sudden, and anyone goes near, they have to have the app on their phone, but anyone goes near the stolen tool, it'll tell you where the stolen tool's at. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. And on top of that, you can remotely disable the tool. You can turn the tool off. So if anyone goes near it with the app, now all of a sudden it doesn't work. And that was kind of, I started saying, okay, that's kind of neat. Cumbersome to manage from your phone? Well, of course, you just use the same login credentials and you go to the website and you get a little bit better presentation of the data, and you've got something that's kind of neat. They actually came up with another device, they call it a TIC, and it's basically the Bluetooth part of it where it tracks the tool. It does everything except the tool settings, and they can slap that on competitors' tools, and so you can add those to your inventory. So I was given this to look at, and I originally thought, well, this is the goofiest thing in the world, but then I started kind of investigating it. The trade industry, the tool industry, is going nuts over this thing. They're absolutely going nuts. It's going to change the entire tool industry. And who thought that adding Bluetooth to power tools would amount to anything except just kind of a novelty? I thought I was just like, wow. And people are like saying, hey, can you make it to where I can detect if it's been dropped? Because I think Bob's an idiot and he drops tools and breaks them. So I want to be able to track that. These people are just like really into this stuff, and their competitors are all scrambling because they're thinking, I got to get one of these tools. Now, the question you ask is, are there any security problems that I found when I looked at the tool? Yeah, there are. I've reported them to the vendor. There's one that's I believe to be fairly serious. There's nothing that causes the tool to malfunction in a way that would hurt the person using it. They were at least smart enough to say that anytime you're doing Bluetooth communication with the tool, you have to physically turn something to Bluetooth, and then it does the transfer of data and whatnot, and then you physically turn it back before you can actually start actually using the tool. And I even tried putting in extremely large values into the database and then pushing them out to the tool, and the software would fix that so that I could not make the thing operate at 5 times the RPM that it was supposedly rated at. So it's pretty decent. They did do some things that were good. They used current libraries for their stuff, and they keep the libraries up to date. But again, they had some problems with it. So the thing is like if you're going to do this type of research and find this stuff, I can give you real quick ideas for how to actually go ahead and do this kind of stuff. And one of the first 5 or 6, I'll tell you about 4 things that I found 4 things wrong with this thing that I've reported to the vendor. The other one that's interesting is I can fake the GPS data and make the tool look like it's anywhere on the planet, which is kind of funny. So, but steps for going through this and finding some of these things are fairly easy. For using, I always recommend the Android app. It's easier to get a hold of. You can download it and then work on it offline. It's a lot harder to get a hold of the iOS apps, but you can certainly get the Android ones fairly easily. On Linux, which is the main operating system I use, there's a free thing called APK tool, and I can just do a decrypt of the APK file, which is the application file, And once not decrypt, decompile. The D is for decompile. So you decompile the thing, and then you can sit there and then just use a grep and look through, use the lowercase r for you can do the recursive stuff, and look for whatever. You can look for the word password. You can look for the word X509 or whatever it is, anything technologically that might have anything to do with certificates or security, and really start going through and finding these things. And I mean, because when it does the decompile, it puts it in a format known as SMALI, S-M-A-L-I, which is, if you don't know what that is, just think of it as halfway between what's in the app and raw Java. You can actually purchase and get things that'll just turn the whole thing into the original Java code and whatnot. It helps to do some type of Bluetooth sniffing if you're doing this thing. I always use multiple devices, such as there's like you can buy a little dongle that supports the latest Bluetooth format. 4.2 is the latest standard. So something, basically if it supports 4.x, it's probably got all the stuff you need, and it'll work with all of the, I just named APK tool as one of them. There's others. Ubertooth is another example of a hardware device you can buy. It's about, I think it's about $100 US. The Sena UD100 is also a good one to get. I have one of those as well. I think it was about $100 US, and I got a couple extra antennas with it. That's kind of neat because you can extend the range. I think I can do an omnidirectional sniff for Bluetooth devices up to half a kilometer. And I can do, with a directional one, I can do a full kilometer. And so that's very interesting when you think about it. There's a number of other tools, such as there's HCI tool, BT scanner, Kismet. There's a whole bunch of things that come with Ubertooth that you can use. If you try going out and actually doing some Bluetooth sniffing, and you can watch presentations that people have done on YouTube where they talk about Bluetooth sniffing. Almost every single one of them has a slide in there that says Bluetooth sniffing is hard, and it is. It's very, very hard to do. You can actually spend a lot of money, upwards of anywhere. I've seen the lowest prices I've seen for some decent equipment to do full-on sniffing like you would with a regular sniffer, like say Wireshark or something on using traditional TCP/IP, but I've seen up to 20,000 US and up for really, really sophisticated hardware to do sniffing. So that, and of course, since I mentioned it, make sure that you use things like there's a tool called Man-in-the-Middle Proxy and also Wireshark, and use those on the Wi-Fi side. I typically, when I'm working on this stuff, I use every single device and every single tool I have. They all give different results, and so and it's whoever wrote the original tools. They wanted maybe say 3 or 4 things, and someone else wanted 3 or 4 things. You pull it together, and you start getting a little bit better picture. Man-in-the-Middle Proxy is probably the most fun one to play with, because that way you can actually look in and read some of the encrypted traffic. This is a screenshot, and it's kind of small and hard to read, but essentially this is the tool during right after it's logged in. This is the response that came back, and it came back with a bearer token. The user ID was unique for the session, down there at the very bottom. The bearer token is up there, it's listed as access token, is that big blob of text in the middle of the screen. That's what's used to authenticate, and it stores that information. Now, typically with a bearer token, you're supposed to, it shouldn't have a life longer than, say, an hour or two, particularly if you're storing it on the device, either in memory or in a database or something like that. This particular, their bearer tokens, this is one of the things I reported to them, has an expiration of 1 year, that's not That's not good. That's not how you're supposed to use that kind of stuff. That's a simple thing for them to be able to fix, and it shouldn't impact the ability of the tool whatsoever. But, I mean, you can do a lot with this kind of stuff. And that leads to the question of, where does one find targets? And you can find them anywhere. So why don't we go ahead and try to find some real quick. This is this should be interesting. I'm going to try to do a live demo of this. This is my phone. Unlock it. And we'll just pull up a Bluetooth scanner. Already seeing things appear. Ooh, got lots of stuff there. This is all Bluetooth stuff that's in the room, roughly. I don't have any antenna. I'm just using my phone. We can connect up to something here. I don't know whose. It's probably an iPhone. Sorry, whoever in the room. I'm connecting to your iPhone. That's taking a while. Maybe it's not an iPhone. You begin to learn how these different tools work. Oh, that timed out. Wasn't an iPhone, but it's something. Let's try a different tool. We'll try this one. I use multiple tools. By the way, these things I'm looking at are the apps I'm using. These are free apps. You can download. A lot of them are made by manufacturers for testing and stuff like that. All right, that looks like it's Apple. And yeah, it's an iPhone. Here's another one. That's someone else's iPhone. The thing right here, the tile, that is, hopefully everyone can see that okay. That's like a Fitbit. There's probably some people in here who got a Fitbit on. There's another tile. Charge, that's a Fitbit thing. Anyone wants to admit to being the person with the charge? HR, feel free to raise your hand. Chromecast Sydney. Wonder what the hell that is. This is a lot of what I do. It's just like I ask myself, what the hell is that? And then I start poking around on it and see if I can do anything with it. But that gives you kind of an idea of, and this is just like in the room. The thing is you got to remember, people leave Bluetooth on all the time. A lot of people with phones will leave it on all the time because they have Bluetooth in their car and they want to be able to, take phone calls through the stereo or listen to some sweet tunes or whatever it is they do. I leave it on all the time on my phone because I have an Apple Watch, and that's how it works. And then, yes, I actually did look at the communication between the Apple Watch and the iPhone, and it's actually pretty secure. So that's kind of just an idea of what you can do with this. Let me jump back to the presentation here, and then let's stop this scanning while I'm at it. I have Wi-Fi turned off in case any of you get any funny ideas and try to attack me back. So you can do this anywhere, okay? Anywhere. I did this on an airplane. Okay, and apparently, I think they were like one row over. I think they may have been sitting next to Dara's, But if you look at the top there, Callie. Callie's hearing aids. All right, I'll let that sink in for a minute. Callie's hearing aids. All right. Now later in the flight, Callie got out her iPad. And she paired her hearing aids functioned as headphones because they were paired to her iPad. I was able to connect up to them, and I was able to get all this information about them. And so on my list of things to get when I can get work to approve, I want to get one of these hearing aids and see exactly how secure these bad boys are. But I just thought it would be kind of funny to be able to pair up to it and then just, Callie, this is God. Give the bald gentleman with the facial hair all your money. You can have some fun with this stuff. But I mean, this stuff is just everywhere. Anyway, so let's start kind of looking a little more forward here. I'm going to do a little bit of pseudo crystal ball stuff, based upon past moving to present, and then kind of moving forward. First item, bad journalism has not helped us, and I think it's going to get worse. I'm not talking about trade magazines and trade journals and trade blogs and stuff like that. I don't know if Andrew's in the room or not. The reporter, not a reporter guy, because he's doing other stuff today. I don't think he's here, but that's someone that's getting stuff right. And most of the trades, they do get the facts right. It's the things that reach the mainstream press, like that whole thing with the Samsung TVs. That's accurate to a degree. Okay, yeah, a specific model of the Samsung TVs could be turned into a listening device. I work with a guy, his name's Josh. He spoke at DEF CON in 2013, I believe, and he's the one that found the problems with the Samsung TVs. So this isn't even a new issue. It just came to light as a part of the whole WikiLeaks, CIA dump and everything. And they said your TV could be spying on you. It's just like, well, yeah, it could be spying on you if you go in and you have that specific model of firmware in there, and you go in with a USB key and you physically plug it in there, flash the firmware with your evil firmware that you've written, and then leave, okay? Then it'll work that way. Now, truthfully, if I can see how that would be kind of a threat at the spook intel level of things, but your average home user, if someone's coming into your house to do that, they'll put one of those, they'll just put a damn phone in there and leave the mic on. I mean, they could do there's any number of things they could do that would be way easier to get information off you. They're not going to go to all that trouble because the TV's probably mounted to the wall. That's a lot of trouble to go through. So it was ridiculous. And this is the bad thing. It's like, as far as mainstream sources, when I talk about mainstream, this is the kind of world we live in. You get better and more accurate news from supposed mainstream, as in non-trade magazine sources, from, like, say, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. I don't know if anyone watches that here. It's on. You can see it on YouTube. It's worth looking for. Teen Vogue. I'm not kidding. Teen Vogue, they do some tech articles. They got some new people, part of their editorial stuff. They're actually going out and getting the facts right, doing proper investigative questioning. So in addition to the stuff they have that normally appeals to young teens and whatnot, it's just like, if you're going to a protest, here's the type of app you should use to make sure you're secure when you're communicating and things like that. I mean, that just really... It says something that it's a satirical comedy show and Teen Vogue that are getting things right, and not the major news networks. We talked a little bit in the panel about over-reactive legislation that people will. A lot of times they're using things that are happening in the headlines. And I think that cyber insurance will begin to change everything, kind of the same way it changed the auto industry in general. There are certain standards. I know that in the United States, there's a whole bunch of things that surround having insurance before you can drive a car, et cetera. There's a whole bunch of these issues that are involved there. And I think they're going to make changes they're going to make changes to our environment in ways we're not going to anticipate. So as far as like regulatory stuff and legislation and stuff, it'll be tied in there. And all I can do is hope that people listen to us nerd types when they're making these decisions. I do think that IoT is going to continue to evolve as a target. We've all talked about it, so I probably don't need to harp on this too much. I don't think that IoT will ever disappear. I think it'll become normal, and then IoT will just become I. Everything will be connected. Right now we call it we used to call them smartphones, but now we just call them phones, right? That's what's going to happen. You're going to have the smart toasters are just going to become toasters. Every toaster you buy is going to be network capable. You're not going to be able to get away from it. You know, any toaster you have that doesn't have an IP address or doesn't talk Bluetooth, that'll be known as an antique. That day will come. Maybe it'll be quaint to show that to your grandchildren. Say, look, here's some toast, and I can't even program this thing. I just got to press the button down, and who knows what the hell's going to happen. You know, it's not going to have a picture printed on it from the off of the internet. Which, by the way, when you think about it, could be a very, very bad thing to have pictures printed on toast. That actually does exist, by the way. There's a toaster that will print a picture on there for you. You know, heaven forbid I figure out how to hack into that. Basics. This is one. This is kind of happening now, but we'll do the quick experiment here. How many people, just raise your hands, and if you don't want to raise your hand, that's fine, but how many people can tell me if they have strong authentication to most of your apps? Strong authentication, a few people raising their hand, okay, all right, that's cool. Are all your systems you manage patched and up to date? Okay, we have a few hands that have gone up, all right, that's good. And then finally, is it just these patched and managed systems that have access to those applications and your data? That's the critical one. And I have yet to be anywhere where anyone raises their hand on this question. I've asked this question in front of other things. If you can answer yes to all three of those, then you've got the basics covered for the direction we're heading. Okay, that's where we're going with this. A good example of this would be like Google's Beyond Core. This is a technology that's being adopted by some companies, including the one I work for, to try to, and it's something that Beyond Core's been around for probably in spec form for 4 or 5 years. It happened after the Aurora breach, where Google got popped, and they says, we need to figure out how to live in a world where people are attacking us and they can be coming from anywhere, and we're allowing all these bring your own devices in there. And I mean, the whole thing, this right here, this is, this ended up being the one that's really doing us in. We'll get into that in a minute, but this thing has just basically become a router for the most part for all of our devices. The more devices we start carrying around with us, smart devices, the more things we start interacting with in our environment at home, everything else. This thing is just a router. It also does phone calls, and you can watch cat videos on it, but that's pretty much it. I do believe also that advances in multifunction in MFA, because we have 2FA, so we have two-factor authentication, but advances in multi-factor authentication are going to kill a password. I think between adaptation of FIDO U2F, where you can start combining biometric data in with your authentication process, I think it will help kill the password, those kinds of things, where you have more than one way of authenticating that doesn't use a password. Password needs to die because the password is bad. It is a bad thing. It is a thing that everyone struggles with. Your users say, why do I have to? They will do the minimal amount of work to make it pass the, you got to have numbers in there. They put a 1 on the end. You got to have special symbols on there. They'll put an exclamation after the 1, and they'll make the first letter uppercase. If that's and make it the minimal length required. That is what they will do. Already, in many instances, I'm functioning like I don't have a password or knowledge of my password because I use a password manager, and it's coming up with, I have it generate this massively complex password for me and store it for me. I don't know what that password is. So in a way, we're kind of heading down that direction. All we need to do is just get rid of that password, and I think we're going to be way, way ahead in security. This last one, it'll start getting a little weird. I don't know how you people feel about human cloning or anything. I'm personally looking forward to it because I want a clone of myself that's been genetically altered where it has, we'll say, at least 2 healthy livers in it, so I can drink all I want, slap in a new liver. I can get rid of, I'm diabetic, I can get rid of my diabetes, I can get a new pancreas. There's all kinds of things. My eyes go bad, I want to get some new eyes that actually see better. While I'm at it, if I'm going to do all that, because, okay, here's, before I get too far into this, okay, everyone with these phones, how many people put their phones if you put them in your pocket, you put them in the same pocket every time? A few people, okay, kind of just out of habit. And then what happens is even if it's on silent, you've learned to recognize the difference between a phone call alert and a text message alert. It vibrates you in a different way, and you don't even think about it. The phone has trained you to react to it. So, and of course, me with this Apple Watch, it's got the haptic feedback sensor on the back of it, so it'll tap my arm when something happens. I can recognize about 4 different alerts on this thing, which is kind of cool. Now, because it's so convenient because I don't have to reach all the way into my pocket to see that I got a text message. Because I can't be bothered with that mess. That's way too much trouble. But you start kind of thinking about how this moves forward. There are shirts you can buy that have haptic feedback sensors in them, and I'm looking for one that I can actually program, or maybe I can find one that I can actually hack, where you could set it where I want it programmable, so I can do things like tap on this shoulder. I've got a phone call. Tap on this one. I've got a text message, maybe a slide up the back means that a system at work just got compromised that I'm monitoring. You can get creative with it, and have these things hit you in different spots, meaning different things, and maybe even have it interact with the environment around you. Now that would be kind of interesting. Let's take that, and then we'll throw in Callie's hearing aid, so now I have better hearing regardless, and if I get a phone call, even in a noisy environment, I'm going to be able to hear it. There are already things known as jawbone microphones, and these are microphones that you put up against your jawbone, and they pick up your voice by vibrations in your jaw. And so you can be in a noisy environment and have one of these jawbone microphones with Callie's hearing aids, and you're able to take phone calls. And you can probably get it at some point as an implant. Maybe it'll look like a piece of, one of those pieces of jewelry. You get a stud that goes somewhere, and it's going to pick up the vibrations of your skull. And, maybe you got to, take it out of your nose and charge it every night, but nonetheless you put it back in, and there's your microphone, and you're able to do this stuff. And you include that with, take one of your cloned eyes if you're scared, but you basically take one, put an implant in your eye. You can have that heads-up overlay that you have like in, Call of Duty. I really want that. I think that'd be cool. And you think some of this stuff seems kind of outlandish, but then what you do is you think about our template here and the direction we're heading. It could actually happen. Things are. Weird things are happening anyway as these things are kind of moving forward. We're seeing them surface in different ways. I got a slide here that the other day I saw this. This was kind of funny that American farmers, they're hacking their tractors by loading on firmware because the John Deere company says if your tractor breaks down, we're not going to come out and service it unless we can plug in this USB device in there and do a proper thing, and you're voiding your warranty if you don't let us to do this. But if the dealer is 40 miles away, and it becomes quite a hassle, and so they've been fighting back by hacking their own firmware. These are farmers. These are not technology people. So I think the whole idea is if they're willing to go out there and start manipulating their environment like that, the idea of, and when you think about everyone getting the latest and greatest things, the idea of starting to put implants into your body and have them all talking to whatever it's not that outlandish. In Adelaide, during the roadshow, someone came up and introduced themselves to me. They had put an implant right here in the webbing of their hand, and that was how they got into their house. It had a sensor in there, and they could open the door, just reach out there and open the door using it identified them using data that was stored in here, and it worked with their house. So this is where things are going. And I can imagine that the military would be all over this kind of thing, at least in the United States, because apparently we have to have our military bigger than all the rest of the planet combined for some odd reason. And with our new guy, he's really going to help us with that, I guess. But there's some things that will occur when you start thinking about how this technology will go. This gun, this future gun or whatever, is probably going to be locked into a transport in its charging station. I'm going to be able to go to that as a soldier, and I can pull it out of the rack. Only I can pull it out of the rack because this thing is biometrically linked to me. And so that way, it won't be like the video games where you drop your weapon and then some other bad guy can come and pick it up and start using it. If I drop my weapon, another bad guy can't come and pick it up and use it because it's not biometrically linked to him. It's my gun. And so couple that with the idea of, haptic sensors to monitor everything, maybe have some type of implant that's checking things like blood pressure and seeing if you have, diseases or if you've encountered some type of infection while on the battlefield. All these kinds of things, the heads-up display with the implant in the eye, all this could actually be kind of what we're looking at in the future. I would hope that if anything good comes out of this insanely crazy militarization that many countries go through, the U.S. being the worst example of all, hopefully the good that comes out of it is that the technology that's developed out of this, much like it happened when we went to the moon, you have a lot of good that ends up being repurposed and brought back to society. And it actually becomes kind of neat. This shit is going to happen at some point. We're reaching that point where things are moving forward. They're moving forward at, for some people, it may be a very uncomfortable and frightening pace, but I think this is going to end up being the brave new world that we're going to be living in. And all I can ask is that since a lot of you are what I'd call edge of normal, is to explore these things well, encourage research, encourage doing the right thing wherever you can, be it the people that you work for, be it the people that you're responsible for securing, and certainly just trying to keep an open mind through all of it. I personally am looking forward to the day when I can hop into my car, my car that's going to drive itself, and I can just say, drive me to the office down in Austin. It's 3 hours away. Wake me up when we get there. And I can just crawl in the back seat and sleep. Maybe I get woken up by my doctor on the way there. He said, the implant in your body is telling us you've got something coming on, a cold, an infection. So we've called in a prescription. It's at the pharmacy that's the next stop on the freeway. And you just get off, go in, take your medicine, and be on your way. That's the kind of world I think would be kind of fun to be in. I'm looking forward to that happening. Let's just hope everything stays nice, safe, and secure along the way. Anyway, that's my presentation.